July 7, 1944. Saipan in the Mariana Islands. The sun comes up over the American locations of the U.S. Army's 27th Infantry Division. In their foxholes and ditches, Marines and soldiers check their guns one last time. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien of the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Unit, holds two Colt M1911A1 pistols, each filled with 7.45 caliber bullets. The aim was straightforward: to live through the biggest banzai charge of the Pacific War. At 4:45 in the morning, the ground shakes. Through the early darkness comes a noise that would stick with those who made it through forever. Thousands of Japanese soldiers yelling as they rush straight at the American lines. You're watching the valor unveiled, where the hardest orders forge the greatest courage. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Leading the charge are officers of the Imperial Japanese Army, their katana swords shining, followed by line after line of soldiers holding Arisaka rifles with bayonets attached. Among them, officers held the usual sidearm of the Imperial forces, the Type 14 Nambu pistol, which used an 8.8 22mm round. What took place next would show the clear contrast between how the two nations thought about personal combat guns, and would make clear why. American soldiers carried what many would call the most powerful military handgun ever made. The American Colt M1911A1 had come to the Pacific with a name already made in the ditches of World War I, created by the famous firearms designer John Moses Browning, and taken on by the U.S. Army in 1911. The single-action, recoil-operated handgun fired the .45 ACP round, a bullet made for one job: stopping power. The .45 ACP sent a 230-grain bullet flying at 830 feet per second from the government-provided M1911A1 pistol. The bullet worked at a fairly low chamber pressure of 21,000 psi, but its heavy, slow-moving projectile created destructive results. The math was harshly clear. When shot from the M1911A1's 5-inch barrel, the .45 ACP bullet had enough force to knock a man off his feet no matter where it hit. The 230-grain bullet, moving at 830 feet per second, would lodge itself upon impact instead of passing through. This quality made it terribly effective in close-quarters fighting, where one well-aimed shot could stop a danger right away. By 1944, American factories had made 1,878,742 M1911A1 pistols for the war. Production had been spread out among several companies: Colt Firearms, Remington Rand, Ithaca Gun Company, Union Switch and Signal Company, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company, which made 500 highly wanted handguns before giving their equipment to other makers. This huge output made sure that American troops in the Pacific were well supplied with dependable sidearms. The U.S. Marine Corps by itself had raised its authorized handgun supply from 798 per division in 1942 to 1,177 per division by 1945. This showed an understanding that fighting in the Pacific often turned into close-up battles where rifles and machine guns were hard to handle. Every Marine officer, many NCOs, tank crews, artillery teams, and special units carried the M1911A1 as their main personal defense gun. In clear difference was the Japanese Type 14 Nambu pistol. Named for Colonel Kijiro Nambu and brought out in 1926, the 14th year of the Taisho period, this handgun was Japan's try at updating their military sidearms. The Type 14 was a striker-fired semi-automatic pistol with an 8-round magazine and a 4.6-inch barrel. Even though it had one more bullet than the M1911A1, the Nambu had basic design and bullet weaknesses. The Type 14 shot the 8.22mm Nambu round, a bottlenecked bullet that sent a 100-grain projectile at about 1,000 feet per second. While this speed was greater than the .45 ACP, the much lighter bullet had far less force and stopping power. The 8.22mm Nambu was unique in its size. Its bullet width of 321 inches and bottlenecked case shape meant it had nothing in common with any other military bullet in the world. This isolation made supply difficult and restricted bullet improvements. Japanese military rules required officers to buy their own sidearms, and the Type 14 had been made to be cheaper than earlier Nambu models. At 78 yen, it was still costly, being a large part of an officer's monthly pay, but easier to get than the 1 to 80 yen Type B Nambu that came before it. This financial truth meant that many Japanese officers in the Pacific carried handguns that were basically not good enough for battle against strong-willed enemies. The Type 14's design weaknesses became clear under fighting conditions. The safety catch needed two hands to use, one to hold the gun, another to move the safety switch above the trigger guard. This made it impossible to get the gun ready quickly while being shot at or in tight spaces. The magazine release was also troublesome. Wet or dirty conditions would make the magazine stick, making reloading hard or impossible. Unlike the M1911A1, the Type 14 had no feature to hold the slide open, so users couldn't instantly tell when the gun was out of bullets. Most importantly, the magazine had a disconnect feature that stopped the pistol from shooting if the magazine was taken out or lost. While meant as a safety feature, this meant that a Type 14 with a broken or lost magazine became completely worthless. Unlike the M1911A1, which could still fire a round in the chamber even with the magazine out. By 1944, Japan had made about 400,000 Type 14 Nambu pistols since 1926. This amount, while large, was small next to American production. The United States had made almost 5 times as many M1911A1 pistols in just the war years, showing the huge industrial power gap between the two countries. The morning of July 7, 1944, would put these weapon systems to the final challenge. Major McCarthy of the 27th Infantry Division later said the Japanese banzai charge looked like a cattle stampede from a Western movie, except the Japanese just kept on coming. The attack came after a night of heavy drinking by Japanese soldiers, with beer and sake drunk in large amounts as they readied for what many knew would be their last fight. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien was in the direct line of the attack. As Japanese officers led the rush with swords drawn, O'Brien pulled out both of his M1911A1 pistols and started firing at enemies at close distance. The 45 ACP bullets were terribly effective against the charging foe. Each 230-grain bullet that hit its target dropped an attacker right away, the heavy projectile putting its full power into the target. When O'Brien used up the bullets in both pistols, 14 rounds in all, he was badly hurt in the shoulder, but kept fighting. Relying on the M1911A1's name for dependability, he had total trust that every trigger pull would fire a shot. The pistol's simple, tough design meant that dirt, blood, and the confusion of battle did not stop it from working. After using up his pistol bullets, O'Brien took command of a Jeep-mounted 50-caliber machine gun and continued his defense. His action at the rear let many of his men fall back and gather again. When the Japanese finally took over his spot, at least 30 enemy bodies were found around his final fighting place, many of them credited to his accurate pistol shooting in the first moments of the attack. The tale of Private Tom Baker from the same fight shows the M1911A's part as a final option weapon. When Baker's rifle bullets were gone, he used the gun as a club until it broke apart on Japanese attackers. Hurt and unable to keep pulling back with his unit, Baker was leaned against a tree by his fellow soldiers. They lit a cigarette for him and put a loaded M19911A1 in his hands with 8 rounds in the magazine, 7 in the mag, plus 1 in the chamber. When Baker's body was found after the battle, the M1911A1 was empty beside him, and 8 Japanese soldiers lay dead in a rough circle around him. Each of the 7 magazine rounds, plus the chambered round, had found a target, showing both the weapon's accuracy and the destructive effect of the 45 ACP bullet in skilled hands. These stories were not one-off events. All over the Pacific, the M1911A1 proved its value in countless fights. During the Guadalcanal campaign in 1942-1943, there was a tense moment at the division command post when a sword-carrying Japanese officer and 2 riflemen charged straight for Admiral Archer Vandegrift. Marines with M1911A1 pistols shot at the attackers at short range, with the 45 ACP rounds showing they could stop determined enemies even when they were in a full run. The power of the 45 ACP round was no mistake. The bullet had been created specifically because of American military experience during the Philippine Uprising from 1899 to 1901. U.S. troops with 38 Long Colt revolvers had met Moro tribesmen who, even when shot many times at close range, would keep fighting. The weak stopping power of the smaller bullet led to a military need for a handgun round of at least .45 caliber. After the Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904, which looked at how well various bullets worked against both live animals and human bodies, the U.S. Army decided that nothing less than .45 caliber would give enough stopping power. The resulting .45 ACP bullet, when shot from the M1911A1, could knock the enemy down from any hit on the body, unlike smaller caliber rounds that might wound without stopping them right away. The mental effect of the .45 ACP was as big as its physical effect. The loud bang and clear impact on targets had a deep effect on enemy spirit. Japanese troops with their weaker Type 14 Nambu pistols soon learned to respect the unique sound of M1911A1 fire. The deep boom of the .45 ACP was obviously different from the sharper pop of smaller calibers, and enemy forces learned to connect it with instant deadliness. Japanese military papers taken during the war showed the enemy's knowledge of American firepower being better. A diary found on a Japanese officer on Bougainville in November 1943 mentioned the crushing nature of American weapons. The officer wrote, "We know we are going to die, so we have no fear of anybody and everyone is high-spirited." But his notes also showed a clear understanding that Japanese troops were overpowered in terms of gear and supplies. Individual Japanese soldiers carried equipment loads of 45 kilos, which was 87% of the average soldier's 52 kilos body weight. This heavy load, along with not good enough weapons and low bullet supplies, made a force that counted on extreme determination instead of planned superiority. The Type 14 Nambu as the main officer's sidearm stood for the larger issues facing Japanese troops, weapons made in peacetime that were not good enough for the needs of total war. The difference in production quality became clear as the war went on. American M1911A1 production kept high standards even with wartime demands. Guns made by different companies were interchangeable, with part consistency ensuring that field fixes could be done using parts from any maker. The pistols were covered with lasting Parkerized finishes instead of bluing, and grips were switched from checkered walnut to brown plastic to make production faster, but mechanical dependability never dropped. Japanese Type 14 production, on the other hand, showed lower quality as the war continued. Late-war pistols made at the Toriyamatsu factory had ungrooved wooden slab grips to speed up production, and the general fit and finish got worse as Japan's industrial ability was strained by Allied bombing and lack of resources. Some late-war Type 14 pistols were marked with dates as late as February 1945, showing production went on even as American troops got closer to the Japanese home islands. The gap in bullet supply was just as telling. The United States made standard military .45 ACP rounds in huge amounts with steady performance and quality checks. Special types were also made, including the M12 T-23 shot round given out in aircrew survival kits. This round held 118 pieces of number 712 birdshot in a red wax paper projectile, letting aircrews with M1911A1 pistols hunt small animals if shot down in enemy territory. A better M15 shot round with 108 pieces of birdshot and better weather protection replaced the earlier one. Japan, meanwhile, had trouble keeping enough supplies of the unique 88 22mm Nambu ammunition. The bullet's special dimensions meant it could not be replaced with captured bullets or made simpler using common parts as Japanese supply lines were cut by American submarine and air attacks. Type 14 pistols became harder and harder to keep working. The quality of American pistol training also helped the M1911A1's combat success. U.S. forces got a lot of instruction in pistol shooting, with a focus on the weapon's role as both a main tool for officers and NCOs and as a backup gun when main weapons failed. The M1911A1's single-action trigger gave a crisp, steady pull that helped with accuracy, while the heavy weight of the all-steel build helped control the kick from the powerful .45 ACP round. Japanese training, in contrast, focused on traditional warrior skills including sword fighting and bayonet use. While these skills could be effective in close combat, they needed to get within touching distance, something that became harder and harder against American troops with better firepower. The Type 14 Nambu was often seen more as a sign of rank than as a useful combat tool, with many officers getting little training in how to use it. The M1911A's dependability in bad situations became famous among Pacific veterans. The pistol worked in the mud of Guadalcanal, the coral dust of Tarawa, the volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, and the wet landscape of Okinawa. Its simple, strong design meant that basic field cleaning could keep the weapon working even in the most difficult circumstances. Stories of M1911A1 dependability were passed down through Marine and Army units. Guns that had been under salt water, buried in sand, or dropped from planes kept working with very little upkeep. The looser parts that some critics said made it less accurate actually helped the pistol work when clogged with dirt, a key advantage in Pacific fighting conditions. The Type 14. Nambu's magazine troubles became well known for being bad among those who used them. The mix of tight fittings and the magazine disconnect feature meant that guns exposed to sand, mud, or salt water often became completely non-working. Unlike the M1911A, which could be quickly taken apart and cleaned with few tools, the Type 14 needed more complex cleaning steps that were hard to do under combat conditions. By late 1944, as American forces got ready for the attack on the Japanese home islands, the difference in small arms effectiveness had become clear. American units carried M1911A1 pistols that had been improved through 3 years of Pacific combat. Changes based on battlefield reports had bettered dependability and handling, while production quality stayed consistently high despite huge output numbers. Japanese forces, meanwhile, faced serious shortages of bullets, spare parts, and even basic weapons. Many late-war units were supplied with a mix of captured guns, old systems, and quickly made gear of lower quality. The Type 14 Nambu, despite its 18-year service life, had never changed to meet the needs of modern war. The invasion of Okinawa in April 1945 gave the final, most bloody test of these weapon systems. During 82 days of harsh fighting, American forces met the most extreme resistance of the Pacific War. Japanese defenders, knowing that Okinawa was the last big hurdle before the home islands, fought with desperate resolve. American forces lost more than 12,000 killed and 36,000 wounded taking Okinawa. But Japanese losses were disastrous: 70,000 military dead, plus between 100,000 and 150,000 civilian deaths. The gap in power between American and Japanese small arms played a key part in this. Result: U.S. Marines and soldiers with M1911A1 pistols could engage and stop threats at close range with trust in their weapons' power. The M1911A1's mental effect on Japanese forces cannot be played down. Captured papers and after-war interviews showed that Japanese soldiers had grown a deep respect for American firepower, especially the destructive effect of .45 caliber weapons. The unique sound of M1911A1 fire became linked with instant deadliness, influencing enemy spirit and battle choices. As American forces readied for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan set for November 1945, planners saw that city combat on the home islands would need wide use of sidearms. The M1911A's proven power in close-quarters fighting made it a vital tool for the expected street-to-street clashes in Japanese cities. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 stopped the war before Operation Downfall could happen. But the M1911A1's name had been firmly set. The pistol that had served American troops from the ditches of France to the beaches of the Pacific had proven its value in the toughest combat situations. After-war studies showed the full size of the difference between American and Japanese small arms making. The United States had made nearly 2 million M1911A1 pistols during the war years, while Japan's total Type 14 production over almost 20 years was just over 400,000 units. This 5-to-1 production edge showed broader industrial abilities that in the end decided the war's result. The power of the .45 ACP round in Pacific combat led to its continued use by American Special Operations Forces long after the M1911A1 was replaced as the standard military sidearm. The round's proven stopping power made it something that could not be replaced for close-quarters combat where stopping a threat right away was vital. Japanese weapons, including the Type 14 Nambu, became highly wanted war trophies among American servicemen. The pistol's unique look and connection with enemy officers made it a valued keepsake despite its lesser combat performance. Many American veterans brought Type 14 pistols home as reminders of their Pacific service, often not knowing that they had carried far better weapons throughout the war. The difference between the M1911A and Type 14 Nambu was more than just different ways of designing a sidearm. It showed basic differences in industrial power, battle doctrine, and knowledge of modern war. The American pistol was the result of an orderly method to weapons creation, using lessons learned from past conflicts and supported by huge industrial production abilities. The Type 14 Nambu, while a big step up from earlier Japanese sidearms, suffered from the weaknesses of a nation that had entered the industrial age fairly recently and did not have the resources for wide weapons development and testing. The pistol's issues were a sign of broader Japanese military problems. Not good enough supply lines, lower production quality, and rules that valued fighting spirit over better technology. For American troops in the Pacific, the M1911A1 gave not just a dependable weapon, but also trust in their gear's superiority. The knowledge that their sidearms could stop any threat with a single well-aimed shot affected battle choices and personal spirit. In the life-or-death moments that marked Pacific combat, this trust could be the difference between living and dying. The lasting impact of the M1911A1 in Pacific combat goes far beyond its mechanical details or production amounts. The pistol became a sign of American industrial strength and tactical skill. Its power against Japanese forces with lesser weapons showed the importance of better technology in modern war. The stories of men like Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien and Private Tom Baker, who used their M1911A pistols to deadly effect in their last moments, became part of American military legend. These tales, confirmed by after-action reports and witness accounts, showed that the right weapons in skilled hands could get results far beyond what simple numbers might suggest. The 45 ACP bullet shot from M1911A1 pistols had stopped banzai charges, taken out infiltrators, and given American troops a dependable last line of defense when everything else failed. In the harsh, close-quarters fighting that was common in much of the Pacific War, the stopping power and dependability of the American pistol proved critical. Japanese forces, despite their bravery and resolve, found themselves constantly overpowered not just in general firepower, but in the basic power of their personal weapons. The Type 14 Nambu, using an underpowered bullet and having design weaknesses that became critical under combat conditions, could not match American weapons that had been made specifically for maximum combat effectiveness. The mathematical truth was unavoidable. A 230-grain bullet moving at 830 feet per second had far more force and stopping power than a 100-grain bullet at 1,000 feet per second. When this was repeated across millions of combat meetings all over the Pacific, this ballistic edge turned into a tactical advantage that helped decide the war's result. The M1911A1 success in Pacific combat proved John Moses Browning's original design and the U.S. military's choice to use the 45 ACP round. The weapon system showed that careful design, enough testing, and huge production could create small arms that gave critical advantages on the battlefield. For Japan, the Type 14 Nambu's weaknesses stood for a bigger problem: the difficulty of competing against an industrial and technological giant while not having the resources for full military modernization. The pistol's issues were a small example of Japan's overall strategic situation, forced to count on fighting spirit and tactical creativity to make up for material shortcomings. The Pacific War showed that in modern fighting, the quality and amount of gear could defeat even the most determined enemy. American forces with better weapons like the M1911A1 and backed by huge industrial production slowly wore down Japanese resistance through sheer material advantage. The power of the 45 ACP round in Pacific combat shaped American military thinking for decades. Even after the M1911A1 was replaced by the Beretta M9 in 1985, special operations units kept using 45 caliber pistols for situations needing maximum stopping power. The lessons learned in Pacific combat about the importance of stopping threats right away continued to guide American small arms development. The contrast between American and Japanese sidearms in the Pacific ultimately tells a larger story about industrial war in the 20th century. Nations that could design, make, and give out better gear in huge amounts had critical advantages over those that could not. The M1911A versus Type 14 Nambu comparison shows this idea at the most personal level, in the hands of individual soldiers fighting for their lives. The success of the M1911A1 in Pacific combat secured its place in American military history and common culture. The pistol became linked with American fighting power, dependability under stress, and the victory of better engineering over lesser options. Its performance against Japanese forces with Type 14 Nambu pistols showed for good that in matters of life and death, equipment quality could decide the outcome. The mathematical certainty of the 45 ACP's performance, 230 grains at 830 feet per second, turned into battlefield power that Japanese forces could not match with their 100-grain bullets at 1,000 feet per second. This difference, repeated across thousands of combat encounters, helped secure American victory in the Pacific and establish the M1911A1 as one of the most successful military sidearms in history.